Hello, everyone, and welcome to our behind the scenes talk on Jake Heggie's 3 Decembers. This is the third presentation of Virginia Opera this season, and we are so excited to be presenting this performance to you live in just a couple weeks across the state. This is a special version of our pre-show lecture previewing the operas that we've been doing all year because we are joined by the composer of 3 Decembers, Jake Heggie himself. I just met him a couple moments ago, and I must say it's like meeting opera royalty or something like that. Someone whose pieces are really launching American opera to a whole new level. So we are so excited to be joined by him this evening, get some insight into how to think about this piece, the creation of it, and how we can better engage with it when we see this in the opera house. It is so wonderful to kind of get this insider peek into the work. And I want to remind you all, as always, that this time together is not about a test. It's not about memorizing facts. It's instead giving you the tools that you need to enjoy the opera as much as possible. So I encourage you to embrace that spirit as we launch into our discussion of 3 Decembers. Reminder that any comments that you put into the video through Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're joining us this evening, we'll be happy to pass along to Jake as we continue and build this dialogue with him about this phenomenal piece. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a little bit of information just about the piece, just basic information, when this premiered, what it in general is about, and things to think about while we have our conversation with Jake Heggie in just a couple of moments. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This opera, 3 Decembers, score by Jake Heggie with a libretto or the text written by Gene Shear, one of Jake Heggie's great collaborators, and we can talk a little bit about that relationship in just a little while. This opera is based on a play by Terrence McNally, one of the great playwrights of our time, with Tony Award-winning hits that really explore the relationships of family, relationships from mothers to sons, and also the relationships that we have with ourselves, dealing with a variety of themes, dealing with the LGBTQ community, things like that. A really phenomenal talent, and also had quite the career writing the libretti and books for some famous Broadway musicals, such as Ragtime. So was not unfamiliar with the kind of singable nature, if you will, of his music and wonderful storytelling. This opera, 3 Decembers, is very intimate. It is only featuring 3 singers and an intimate orchestra of 11 players. And for a bunch of reasons, partially the sense of intimacy that we get as we see this family and we see their lives unfold. It's one of the reasons why it's one of the most successful of the operas to premiere since the year 2000. You may or may not know it, but we have been in the middle of somewhat of an operatic renaissance over the past couple of decades, and it's American works such as 3 Decembers, or Jake Heggie's other wonderful masterpieces, Dead Man Walking, Moby-Dick, and others that have really kind of catapulted this idiom forward. This piece premiered February 29th, 2008, so we're only a little over a decade after its premiere, and is only 90 minutes long. Again, this thing is tight, it is compact, it is intense, and it's funny. All of that wrapped into a very short amount of time. The story itself tells the journey of a family across 3 Decembers, as the title really outlines quite directly. And it takes place from 1980, spanning 1986 to 1996 to 2006, basically spreading the time of the most intense portions of the AIDS epidemic. Our 3 singers represent our very small family. We have the mother, Madeline Mitchell, premiering the role back in 2008, Frederica von Stade. We have the fabulous Karen Ziemba, who I'm sure is just going to tear it up in our production with Virginia Opera. And then her daughter, Beatrice, and son, Charlie. really phenomenal roles that deal with lots of complicated themes. We see the AIDS epidemic that I've already mentioned play out across these 3 Decembers as all 3 members of the family stay in touch via letter, phone call, all kinds of different things that transpire. We see these relationships in all of their complexity and in all of their various perspectives. I feel when I watch 3 Decembers like I'm watching a diamond and I'm looking at these relationships from all kinds of different angles. Family secrets, the family that we choose versus the family that we're born into. Madeline Mitchell is a famous Broadway star. If you think of like kind of a Meryl Streep or something like that, she's a fabulous actress who's often, it seems, put her career in front of her family, and so we see those themes unfold. And it's worth noting that in preparation for the production with Virginia Opera, my own viewing and listening to this piece has changed. I think coming out of the past 2 years where we were living smaller lives, where we didn't travel, where we were learning to reconnect with the people that we love the most and who maybe frustrate us the most, and being in contact over things like video messaging, that this piece, which has always been relevant since it premiered, dealing with very contemporary themes with contemporary language, suddenly has this vibrancy that feels like it is worthy of our pandemic era. That's kind of my assessment, if you will, my reaction in preparing this evening. And I'm curious to hear Jake's thoughts in revisiting this piece after the moments that we are all living through. Some things to keep in mind as we are talking with Jake, and then also when we get to the actual performance in just a couple weeks. What to listen for, what to look out for. First, melody. Jake Heggie's melodies are stunning. Right up there with kind of the great melodies of Puccini or the other great melodies and themes that we get from our favorite operas. You hear that. This is, cinematic in many ways as we go across time, across locations, as we get the story of this family and the secrets and the relationships begin to unfold. We get a brilliant orchestration. This is one of the kind of hallmarks of a Jake Heggie opera, is that the orchestra not only supports the singers, but supports the drama in really thrilling ways, in really powerful ways. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to the instruments, and he may have some insights for us as we talk with him and move forward in our discussion this evening. But beyond the kind of soaring melodies and the poignant moments, such as when Charlie confides in his sister about the complex relationship that Madeline has with his partner, for example, as they go through time, we also get lots of musical wit, musical jokes, musical lightness. We see all of the emotions that play out through this family. This is one of the only operas that I know of where two people sing an operatic duet about shoes. So this is just a wonderful, witty opera that anytime you think it's going somewhere, it will quickly flip it around. And to me, that sounds exactly like modern life. The language that is provided by Gene Shear and inspired by the play by Terrence McNally is charming. The characters speak specifically, therefore they sing specifically. And we have lots of moments that, for me, I'd never seen on the operatic stage before, dealing, as I mentioned, with Charlie and his partner, but also all of the other family dynamics that come to light when we're dealing with a modern subject and we let our time sing. So with that brief overview on just kind of the bare bones of the story of what this piece is, I want to go ahead and invite Jake Heggie to the StreamYard location, if you will, and begin our conversation with him. Jake, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is a real pleasure.
Grateful to be with you. Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. Can you talk about how this opera came to be and what it was like as you were writing this opera?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very generous introduction. I appreciate it so much. In 2000, my first opera, which had a libretto by Terrence McNally, Dead Man Walking, had its premiere. And let's say it went very well. and I was invited to write a second opera by Houston Grand Opera, and that turned out to be The End of the Affair, which was smaller, a little bit smaller forces. And then I was really yearning to write something for very uh, intimate ensemble after having written something so massive. And then I knew that Moby-Dick was on the horizon, and that was also massive. But interestingly enough, I went to Terrence McNally and I asked him if he had a story or a script or a play or something that he had in his back pocket that I could base the next piece on. He was instrumental in every way in my career. He was the one who thought of Dead Man Walking. He actually thought of Moby Dick, even though he didn't wind up writing the libretto because he was ill. And you know, he was one of the first casualties of COVID in 2000. He was a great friend, great, amazing man of the theater, and had this passion for opera throughout his work. You know, Masterclass, the story about Maria Callas giving a masterclass that won him the Tony Award. You know, many of his plays focus on opera or include opera. So I asked him about a script, and he handed me this thing called Some Christmas Letters, and he had written it as a script for an AIDS benefit at Carnegie Hall that was sung by the Gay Men's Chorus in 1999. And it featured Julie Harris as Madeline Mitchell, Cherry Jones as Beatrice, and Victor Garber as Charlie. And it was at Christmas time, so there were Christmas carols sort of intermingled with it. And he wrote it took place over 3 decades, and it was about a famous actress and her 2 adult children. She was a single mom and had raised the best that she could. And I remember looking through this script and just being it was like 14 pages long. And I was just so intensely moved because I had been looking for a way to include something about the AIDS epidemic in my work. And I had also been yearning to do something that was in the world of musical theater. So actually at first, when this story appeared, Terrence and I thought it might be a musical because people have been asking me for years. I grew up loving musicals. That's how I didn't know anything about opera. So I grew up loving the big movie musicals and anything that was coming into town. I knew nothing about opera. So I always thought I would write a musical. And she, in this story, is a great musical theater star. Well, a great theater star who is singing her first musical. Mm-hmm. And so we were going down this road where I brought in Stephen Schwartz, who wrote, you know, Godspell and Wicked and a few other little classics, you know. I brought him in to write the lyrics because we're great friends. And so we were going down this road as a project, and all of a sudden it started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden it was 20 people in the cast and a dance company, and it was about to explode, and it fell completely apart. And the thing was, we had made it much more than it was ever intended to be. And Frederica von Stade, who I was writing the role for, who's also a great friend, said, you know, I think we got a little far away from where we intended to be, 3 characters over 3 different decades in this intimate family drama. And so I said, you know what, you're right. And you know what, I do write musicals. It's just that I write them for opera singers and opera houses because I bring everything that I love about the musical theater and everything I love about the opera world and tell stories that way. And so I went to my friend Patrick Summers at Houston Grand Opera and said, look, we've been down this big road with this piece and it's going to fall apart. Would you commission it as a 3-character opera with a small ensemble for the small theater in the Cullen Auditorium, Brown Auditorium, and in the Cullen Theater? And he said yes. And so all of a sudden it turned around, and I brought in Gene Shearer to write a full libretto based on the script. And he made all these inventions and created all these things. The family secret at the middle of it was his idea. And it has to do with the death of the father, that the kids, they struggle. They wanted to know him, but he died when he was so young, and all their memories are sort of from their mother, and her decisions and her actions have affected their lives in ways that they can't even imagine. So it was a complicated beginning and journey, but it's actually appropriate because it's a very challenging story. There's a lot of levels to it. And anyway, it premiered in Houston. And then we did a lot of rewrites, and since then it has had a great life. It started off as a 2-act opera, and then we made it into a 1-act. I rewrote a big number for the Madeline Mitchell character. We added some other music, extended some stuff, cut some stuff, and created this piece that has gone on to have this fantastic life. And I'm thrilled that you're doing it. I can't wait to see Karen Ziemba do this role.
Yes,
I'm such a
oh my
huge
God.
fan.
And so Lopez, and just the entire
Yeah,
cast is and
yeah,
directed by Larry Edelstein,
yeah.
who is
And
a
conducted
wonderful
by Adam Turner, who I
and
had
conducted by Adam Turner.
great people, great people.
Really, really
Yeah.
incredible production. I'm curious to learn a little bit from you. So this piece is brought into the world. You
Mhm.
amend it, you shorten it, you do what you do to it, and then it goes out. How has your perspective on this opera changed? Have there been productions or singers or interpretations that have kind of shifted how you thought about these characters, or has it pretty much stayed as is in your brain? Can you tell
Oh
me
no,
about
this is what I live for with any piece that I write. I try to get it as clear as possible on the page, but leave lots of room for individual performers to bring their personality, their life story, their experience to it. And then when I see someone really do that and embrace it and go for it as their own character, I learn something about the piece
Hmm.
that I never thought of. That's what inspires us when we see a great new production of Traviata and a new Violetta that just like, wait, what? I thought I knew this opera. What just happened? It's the same with any of my operas. I'm so excited to see new casts and new perspectives and productions that give that shed new light on the story. Something that I don't pretend to know everything that I'm writing about. I just listen and respond, and that's pretty much my process. Is I get very, very close to these characters. I listen to them, and eventually they start singing to me, and it becomes like taking dictation. And instead of me, the goal is not for me to impose notes on them. It's for me to listen to them and let them share what's in their heart and find the heartbeat and pulse of every moment that leads us forward, and let things emerge and surprise me as they do the audience. But it was a challenging piece because a lot of it resonates very personally for me. And even though I love and care about every single character in every opera that I do, and I'm writing my 10th opera, which is a lot of operas and a lot of notes. Okay,
It's a lot of
it's a lot of notes. It getting very close to them in this way because my mom was a single mom when I grew up. My father committed suicide when we were growing up. I was very close with my sister. I am gay, like Charlie. I had to deal with that whole thing in addition to these feelings of what was my dad like? Why did he leave? And so I was very, very close to the characters, and I had to be very careful not to get too close to them, just to listen to them and let them sing. But it was a way to embrace and deal with a lot of very complicated family dynamics that I think people can understand and recognize. I don't know. I maybe know 2 people in my entire life who had like idyllic childhoods where everything went right. Otherwise, something inevitably goes wrong and we have our challenges, with our family. And so it's a story about that, the things that divide us, the things that bring us back together. And it's a story of redemption and forgiveness as well. I think the final scene is probably one of the most powerful things I've composed, and probably that Gene wrote, just in terms of the sense of redemption and forgiveness that fills the room. Um, so it was a big journey, but the whole thing from thinking it was a musical, reading the play, the script, thinking it was a musical, finally making an opera, and it premiering was about 7 years.
Oh wow.
It's a long gestation. Yeah.
That is a very, very long gestation. You
Yeah.
mentioned that Terrence McNally taught you, or was such a creature of the theater.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what he taught you about how to write for the theater? Granted, you're writing in different mediums.
Well, what I found is I am a theater composer, and I always knew it, but I didn't know fully until I was composing the score for Dead Man Walking. It came so naturally. I was like, oh, that explains why I've always been drawn to these singers, these songs, this kind of work. But he was a very generous collaborator. And when we were first working on Dead Man Walking, he said, look, my goal is to inspire music for you. He goes, because ultimately the music has to lead. It's an opera. Yes, the libretto, the characters, the words, all of that matters enormously. But if the music isn't leading, then it's just a sung play. And he goes, and that's not what I'm interested in. That's not what I'm interested in. So he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write scenes and characters and dialogue that I hope will inspire you. If it doesn't, you either cut it or you fill in. If the music is taking off and the words don't fit, you write your own words and then we'll check them later. Or you ask me for other things or we'll cut. It was an incredibly generous collaboration. And so I learned an enormous amount from him just in terms of collaborating on a big piece like this. Which has served me well ever since. And then I found Gene Shear, and that collaboration has just gone on and on and on.
Can you talk about that working relationship? I think the one of the things talking to opera lovers, that's always so fascinating is that librettist composer, it's not Wagner writing both at the same time. What is that relationship? How does that play out?
Well, what I loved about working with Terrence, what I love about working with Gene is I can challenge him to do better work and he can challenge me to do better work. And we just have a really easy communication. We like each other. We respect each other. Each of us comes up with ideas. Sometimes, he suggests something, I suggest something, and in the end, it doesn't matter because it's all about serving the piece and serving the story. So the egos just get pushed aside and it's just about, let's create something beautiful and meaningful. So if I wrote a word, if he suggested, a melody or something like that, it's all part of our work together. And he's an ideal collaborator because he's not only a wonderful lyricist and poet and writer, he loves theater. He was a stage performer himself and a singer and a composer. He wrote the American anthem that Norah Jones sang as the soundtrack for Ken Burns' series, The War, and that our president quoted at his inaugural address and has been made into a children's book. It's just amazing. Gene is a man of many talents, just like Terrence was a man of many talents in that way, and really good person that's fun to be with. And it really inspires me to do my best work. And that's what you want. You want to serve, it's all about the people you work with. So knowing who we're writing for, like for example, 3 Decembers, we were writing for Frederica von Stade. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And when we were doing, Moby-Dick, we were writing for Ben Heppner. And when we were doing It's a Wonderful Life, it was, Bill Burden and these wonderful, wonderful talents that inspire us and give us confidence. I always tell people who are, wondering why it has to be so specific. It's all about gaining clarity so that the audience can get into the story and experience it rather than trying to figure it out. But if you were a screenwriter and someone came up to you, a production company said, "Oh, we're going to do a film about Eleanor Roosevelt. We'd like you to do the script." And you're like, "Okay, Eleanor Roosevelt. Oh, and by the way, we have Meryl Streep as Eleanor Roosevelt." And you go, "Okay, I got it. Now I understand." It's the same thing when you have a great singer like Flicka or Jamie Barton or Joyce DiDonato or, any of these great people that really inspire us. And in the premiere, it was not only Flicka, Frederica von Stade, but it was also Keith Fares as Charlie and Kristen Clayton, a very dear friend of mine, as Bee. So it's all about that spirit in the room and everyone being willing to try things. And it's just the most thrilling thing.
That's amazing. and it's interesting hearing you talk about that, because one of the things I think is so wonderful about your operas is the kind of the generosity that comes through, even in something that is so different in subject matter, such as like Dead Man Walking. There's still a generosity and a kind of honesty that comes through. So it's great to hear that was true in the room where it happened as well.
It has to be. Otherwise, how can you create art? If it becomes just about satisfying someone's ego, that's going to be the focus, and that's destructive, So you have to fill the room with people who are all about the project and making it work and doing their part to make this thing happen, which is thrilling. And then you can be authentic. You can find the pulse and the heart of the piece, and you can really create it together. And that's what's exciting. If you get it right, and there's no magic formula for that. It takes just as long to write a piece that works as one that doesn't work, okay? but you know, if you have all those ingredients, you stand the better chance. And I've had both ways where it was so difficult that the piece eventually crashed and burned. But this one was a joy once we found the right medium for it, that what really was an opera.
Yeah. So I'm curious, let's take a step back in time a little bit. You
Sure.
mentioned, that you were a theater kid, and
Mhm.
loved Broadway, I assume, and,
Yeah.
various, all kinds of musical theater. So how did your journey into opera transpire? How did you thread that needle?
Well, I was always mostly drawn to solo singers. When I was growing up, I loved all the movie musicals, of course, Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins, and the great old movie musicals that they would show, at the theater or on TV every now and then. But then Streisand came along into my life, and that was a voice like nothing I'd ever heard. And it was the story. She was a natural storyteller who not only sang the song, but became the song. And then I started listening to other great solo singers. My sisters were into bands and stuff like that, but I was always interested in the solo voice. And so I was, my mom took me to a production of an opera when I was a kid in Columbus, Ohio. It was pretty terrible. And so that didn't make much of an impression. But then when I got older, I started making friends with people who were studying singing, and that drew me in. But it wasn't until when I was 18, I graduated high school. I moved to Paris to go to the American College of Paris. And I mean, when you're a student in Europe, you can go to anything for practically free. So I started going to everything, and I started going to operas. And I just had a couple of experiences where like the top of my head popped off, And I took a music appreciation course with a teacher who loved opera. And one day he played the Presentation of the Rose from
Mm.
Rosenkavalier. And I was sitting in the back of the room. I can remember how I felt. I had never heard anything so beautiful in my life. And I just started gushing tears, and I was literally shaking. And he noticed because no one else in the room responded that way. And so he made suggestions of things that I might enjoy too. And so when I came back to the US, I saw Peter Grimes with John Vickers. And
Mm.
again, the top of my head kind of popped off. And then I saw Sweeney Todd in the original national tour with Angela Lansbury. And that, again, that was another thing, was like, how is all of this possible? And that led me more and more to this combination of operatic musical theater, big drama, big stage drama, and led me more and more to opera singers. And then I became friends with opera singers. And then, you got to write for them. You got to write for your friends.
Absolutely. You
So
want
that's
everyone in that room.
exactly. So that's how it evolved. And that's how I met your general director, Peggy Dai, when she was an Adler Fellow at the San Francisco Opera.
Oh my
I
goodness.
was in the PR marketing department at the time. I did not have a career as a composer. I had moved to San Francisco after injuring my hand. It's what's called a focal dystonia. I'm a pianist, and so I thought I was going to be a concert pianist, or at least play for singers. And it started to curl up into a fist. So I went through all this stuff, and I moved to San Francisco, and I got a job at the San Francisco Opera, writing for the company as the PR marketing director. And so every day, my job was to watch opera being built, prepared, go to that opera house, get to know every corner of it, every person in it, write stories about them, talk to the press about it, talk to audiences about it, and get to know everyone. And one of my friends was Kristen Clayton, who was the original Bee. She was an Adler Fellow. Peggy was an Adler Fellow. And so getting to know these people and then getting the chance to write for them. I wrote a piece actually for Peggy for her big recital series called Songs and Sonnets to Ophelia, which actually gets done all over the world now.
Oh my
And
gosh.
Peggy gave the premiere of that piece back in the 1900s.
Oh, you want to
But
ask for an encore? Yeah.
I love singers, and I care about them, and I love writing for them and collaborating with them. So every project is just it's a big adventure and a great time. And that's what 3 Decembers was. And it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to hear Karen Ziemba, because I mean, I saw her in Contact. I heard her in
Mhm. Tony Award-winning
Chicago.
performance for those of you who
She won a
haven't
Tony
seen her
for it.
before.
I've seen her over the years in shows, and to think that she's going to portray Madeline Mitchell, a Broadway star, um, and sing this big role, this big, challenging, beautiful, heartbreaking role. I'm just thrilled. I think it's brilliant casting. And then Efrain Solis, I've heard him do the role of Charlie before. I've never heard your B before, but I'm so excited to. I won't be there, but I'm hoping I'll be able to tune in to somehow.
Yeah, and it's kind of become a signature for him. I think he's
Yeah,
sung the role of Charlie at several different companies. So
yeah,
excited to
he's
see that,
awesome, awesome.
that
Yeah,
performance. So let's go back to the compositional process. You
sure.
explained already this kind of organic, listening to the characters and letting them sing.
Hmm.
Let's take it one step further. Those
Yeah.
melodies start to come to you. How do you, because there's such a give and take in this opera between kind of the dialogue scenes where it opens into aria.
Hmm.
How do you handle that? How does that work for you? And then also the orchestra, how does that factor?
Well,
So
I always think orchestrally, even though I'm a pianist and I play things, I'm always thinking orchestrally, even if I might not know what the orchestra is yet. I'm thinking in terms of instrumentation and anyway, that's the way I conceive it. And the most challenging part for any opera is coming up with these sound worlds that these characters. Every opera to me needs to have its own identity, uh, its own harmonic, rhythmic sound world. Like I would hope you'd never mistake an aria from Moby-Dick for an aria from Dead Man Walking or an aria from Three Decembers. They have their own distinct identities.
Mhm.
It's one of the reasons I like to take such vastly different stories and challenge myself anew, because I want to grow as a composer. I want to learn. I want to be terrified when I take on a project. Like, I think I can do that. How am I going to do that? Um, and so once I get to know the sound world and the characters, things just start to emerge. And the main one of the main tunes from Three Decembers is this opening figure, dum da dum dum dum, which sounds very sort of Broadway or Hollywood, and it's based on Madeline Mitchell's name, Bum Madeline Mitchell, and that became one of the big themes. And then other things started to emerge, the dynamic between the brother and the sister, her struggles with an unfaithful husband and a challenging marriage, wanting to be the perfect wife and mother after she had a mother that she thought did not show up for her, did not do a good job. Her internal struggles and her struggle with alcohol, um, all of that informs the character. Madeline's big secret, plus her ambition and her drive, plus her deep, deep love for her children, even though they sometimes doubt it or don't know it, that every choice she's made has been because of how much she loves and cares for them, as well as being driven to be on the stage. And then Charlie's journey. So all of this and the dynamic between them, that somehow shapes itself into music and harmony and rhythm for me. And some of it is based on the words that they say, but it's also based on things that they're not saying. And that's what the music can give us, the things that they're not saying. Again, I don't want to just do a play set to music. I want to write an opera where the music is leading it and is giving us, and it's so essential that it's giving us information that we could not possibly have otherwise. Um, and that's the point of the music in an opera. But then things just start to evolve very naturally. Once I've got sort of the characters in my mind and they're singing to me and it starts to come to life, it's really a matter of just listening and patiently working it out and trying to get it right and knowing when it's not right and then suddenly knowing when it is right, which is a weird thing, but that's part of the creative process too. But it's in a way, it's like if you think of it, if you need a physical image for it, it's like shaping an oral clay. Like if you think of sound as this clay and you're kind of molding it, you're pushing it over here, and all of a sudden this emerges and like, oh wow, I hadn't thought of that. Well, let's go and see what that's about. And so it evolves over time, and eventually you find a shape, and the piece happens, and melodies emerge. Um, it's very, a good tune is not necessarily easy to come by, but if it sounds inevitable and like it's always been that way, like of course it goes like that. Well, that's the goal, but that's not always the easiest thing to find.
Right. You touched on kind of the editing and revision process
Mhm,
and the listening to the music.
mhm,
You mentioned earlier that this piece went through a pretty significant revision after its premiere.
mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about any surprises that came from that process? There's kind of a whole lineage of great operas that have been revised into their current
Yeah.
version. Were
Well,
there
the
any
thing is
surprises?
with any opera, the last character to show up is the audience. And until you have an audience, you can get way too close to your material, and you don't really know what the piece is. And audiences don't lie. They're there because they want to be entertained, they want to be moved, they want to learn something, they want to experience something, they want to feel changed, at least for that moment. And they want to be, they want time to fly by, and like to be really immersed in great storytelling. And so we can think that we're there, but then opening night, you get this, like I said, an audience doesn't lie. And if you suddenly feel like you can feel people's attention drifting, or if they're confused at a moment, so that's what they're paying attention to rather than the story that's ongoing, or something is too short or something is too long. Those are the things you learn, which is why Broadway shows have previews, and they do rewrites and changes and put them in every single day. We can't do that in the opera. So what I've learned in my process is that by about the third production of an opera, if I'm really meticulous, is when it finally lands. I've been lucky enough to have that many productions of most of my pieces. So I'm able to work on them at different cities as the opera gets done by different people. And so it started off as a 2-act opera, and it became very clear that intermission was a big mistake. It broke everyone's train. It broke our connection to the characters that we'd been building. This emotional, everything in opera is about building this emotional arc. And the minute that gets interrupted and you have to start it again, you've lost something. So that's why jumping around in time is very difficult in an opera. It doesn't work as well in an opera because, again, you're building this long emotional line. And this particular intermission just stopped everything. And so you expected the audience to jump right back in where they were, and it didn't work. So we needed to get rid of that intermission, which meant I needed to write some other music. There was also an aria for Madeline that was a big, brassy Broadway type number in the first part of this when she does a Broadway number. And it didn't give us any new information about the character. It was the wrong mood, it was the wrong tone, but we didn't know that until after the piece had opened, and we went, oh, what actually she needs is something very heartfelt and inward and deep. And so we cut that whole number and rewrote and wrote a new number. So those kinds of things, but things that you can't learn until it's up on its feet in costume with the instruments and on stage. And you had asked me about the orchestra, and part of that with the 11 instruments was originally this was going to be 3 singers and 2 pianos. And I went, oh, as I was writing it, I was like, oh, please, can I have some instruments? Because the idea was that everybody would be on the stage. And so they said yes, of course. So I added 9 instruments, some strings, some winds, 1 percussionist. And the original production had everyone on stage. I was at the second piano. Patrick Summers, the conductor, was at the first piano. And so I wrote it so that everyone could be on the stage and the orchestra was immersed and part of the story. It was very exciting, very, very challenging, but really, because that becomes a chamber piece, that few instruments.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any, and I'm not asking this any kind of leading question or anything,
Sure.
but is there anything that we should be listening for in the orchestration? Are there instruments that you associate with different characters or themes that might be obvious or not? Any kind of insight into that listening experience?
Oh, I think it'll be very, very clear. There's a saxophone in the orchestra. Each of the instruments, solo winds, has a particular sort of color and character to it. And I don't know that there's an instrument that's particularly associated with any one character, but you'll notice, I think the themes are very strong and very clear. So each character does have a theme, and those themes interweave and grow over time, which is why I think the payoff in the last scene, this big forgiveness and redemption scene, is so incredibly powerful. But it's I'm actually not the person to ask about that. You should ask a musicologist. I have students who are studying my scores always call me and they ask me, so you did this key change right here. What did that mean in terms of the overall architecture of this? And I'm like, I don't know. It just felt right. I was just listening and that is the right solution. And so that's what I wrote.
That's awesome. We
Yeah.
had a comment come in through the chat, which I think you've already addressed. Have you ever had a song or scene where you thought it was not right at first, but then grew on you and sort of became right? You mentioned revising the
Mhm.
Madeline Mitchell number. Was there anything that maybe the jury was out on, and then seeing it with the audience, you went, "Oh my gosh, that works better than I ever anticipated"?
um, Usually it's the opposite. Usually it's something that I'm very much in love with and really close to, and then you find out it doesn't work at all, and so you need to write something else. I haven't, but I've had things where I knew I had found like I don't know if there are hit tunes in opera. I guess there are, but that I have found like I found like a really strong, really good tune to the point where I'll call a friend and say, "Okay, I'm going to play this for you. Did I write this or did someone else write this?"
Or is
Because
this from a classic
it
movie?
sounds so obvious and clear and inevitable. I could not have written this, right? And they listen and they go, "Yeah, I think you actually wrote that. I mean, yeah, it has that feel to it, but you know." So every now and then, one of those tunes comes along, and in this piece, I think it's the duet between Charlie and B on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Mm.
There is a very, very special tune that emerges, and I, I remember that day so well. It was early 2007, and all of a sudden there they are trying to remember things about the dad they never knew, under the influence of their mom's memories. They're on the Golden Gate Bridge. Charlie's partner is very sick and not well. B is in an unhappy marriage, and there they are holding each other up and remembering. And this timeless sort of tune and duet emerged that almost feels kind of Baroque.
Mm.
Um, and it's just one of those moments where I just gave myself over to it. And I said, I don't know if this is my tune or not, but I'm going to have to write it. And it haunted me. It gave me no peace. And finally, I played it for like Gene or our director, Leonard Folia. And they went, yeah, I think that's your tune. And it's exactly right. So those things kind of, when I have this feeling in my core that it's right, it usually is. But there have been times when I've been surprised.
Another question just came in from one of our viewers on Facebook.
Mhm.
Can you share anything about what you're working on currently? And actually, we were talking right before this, and there's a very strong Virginia connection with one of the pieces that you're currently working on.
Yes, I'm writing an opera for the Houston Grand Opera called Intelligence, and it's about women spies in Richmond during the Civil War. Two women in particular, Elizabeth Van Loo, who came from a very privileged white family that when she was a young woman had owned slaves, and Mary Jane Bowser, who had been an enslaved woman in that family. And together they built kind of a spy ring, um, and got information to the north under tremendous danger, high stakes beyond belief, incredibly strong, powerful women charting a course using the skills and the tools that they had to make a difference. And it was actually a docent at the Smithsonian that originally told me this story,
Hmm.
and I got really angry that I didn't know the story,
Yeah.
because I thought, why do I not know this story? These women are amazing. And it was about the way I felt too when I saw the movie Hidden Figures and realized, how come I don't know that story? Because of course it was all pushed aside because it was strong, brilliant women with high stakes making a difference, differences that touch and change our lives to this day. But the story of Elizabeth and Mary Jane has such resonance today and is so powerful and so timeless. And Gene Shearer has written a beautiful libretto, and we're working very closely and collaboratively with an amazing woman named Jawale Zoller, who runs a company, founded a company called Urban Bushwomen
Mm.
in
Oh, yeah.
Brooklyn. And Jawale just won a MacArthur Genius Award. So she's our choreographer and director and co-collaborator on creating the piece. And so I've never done a piece like it. Like I say, I always do things that terrify me. And and she's been so inspiring. And I can't tell you who the cast is, but it's like mind blowing how great the cast is. Um, and so we've been working on it for quite a while, and it was very challenging during COVID. there was so much uncertainty that I found it very difficult to write music. But now finally it's coming back. So I'm almost done with the piano score, and then we'll do one more workshop and then I'll orchestrate it. So right now it's set for the fall of 23.
Okay. Well, I know all of us watching are now going to be putting on Google alerts for that to see.
Oh, it's the most amazing story, and it's going to be so freaking cool how we do it. I can't even tell you, because dance and movement is sort of infused into every corner of this, and I've never done anything like it. It's just incredibly exciting.
Does that change the compositional process going from a more kind of, in the case of like Moby-Dick, you're dealing with lots of stage movement because of the boat, but still, opera choruses and, your secondary characters and your main characters. Does that change the way that you write when it's for?
Well, it's one of the reasons I take on different projects, to sort of push me out of my comfort zone and scare me into doing something different that I had never thought of before. Like I said, the goal is not, of course, of course I'll do that. That's obvious. I don't want a project like that. I want one where it's like, I think I can do that, but I don't know how I'm going to do that. But I'm really on fire with this, because it needs to be, I mean, you're talking years of your life to write one of these operas. So it has to be something that not only you feel you want to write, but that you absolutely must write. It has to be a fire inside of you. And the reason I know a project is right for me is I'll get that shiver of music and recognition where I don't know what the music is, but I know it's there. I mean, Moby-Dick was terrifying to write. I mean, it's Moby-Dick, okay? And taking that massive novel and making it into a cohesive 3-hour evening of opera was challenging. This is very challenging in yet another way. So yeah, I do think, and then you think of like 3 Decembers, this very intimate opera with big human themes and big heart and big issues that you're dealing with. Again, very challenging in that small, intimate group. So each of them, I choose the story. I think the story actually chooses me, because someone will suggest, a docent suggested, intelligence. Terrence McNally suggested Moby-Dick, and I was like, what? And then I felt the shiver, and I saw the twinkle in his eye, and then I read the book and I went, oh yeah, this makes total sense. It's terrifying, but it makes total sense. So it's all of that, but there's no clear or obvious path, except that I know I need to feel challenged and inspired, terrified, and in love with the project.
That is an alchemy that may we all be so bold to embrace. Yeah. Yeah, and Verdi and Puccini, I think, talked about their tinta that each opera, needs to have. I'm curious, you mentioned that it was hard to write during kind of the darkest days, if you will, of COVID. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience as someone in the arts over the past couple of years, what you're comfortable sharing, and then kind of what your hopes are moving forward, with this, what sounds to be an incredible piece on the horizon. Where are you right now with opera in this moment?
Oh, you know what? The thing is, I'm very optimistic about opera. Traditional opera houses uh, and the opera world is struggling because things are changing, and change is difficult. And the opera world, certainly in the 20th century, became very, very staid. Um, when you think about the origins of opera, it was all about new work, always. The public wasn't as interested in hearing old pieces. They wanted new pieces through the 18th, 19th century. Everything was new, right? And that sort of stopped or slowed down immensely during the 20th century. And now it's come back, certainly in this country. The United States is leading on that front. Yeah. And what it's demonstrating again is that opera is an incredibly versatile art form. And it can be done in so many different ways, in so many different places. We have operas being done in parking garages and community centers, as well as big opera.
Where Virginia Opera did Rheingold.
Yeah, right? So, and it works. And it can be a really thrilling theatrical experience. It's an enormously flexible art form. And that's what I'm really excited about, is that young composers are seeing it as an opportunity. And singers, because you can't do opera without great singers, You know, even when I wrote Dead Man Walking, the majority of singers were not interested in exploring a new work
Hmm.
because the feeling was it's bad for their voices because they were used to hearing this very academic stuff. It was very angular and very challenging. But then this lyricism has emerged. Um, you know, Dead Man Walking, incredibly lyric opera.
Mhm.
And suddenly all these singers started showing up who wanted to do new operas. And now there are singers who devote their entire careers to doing new work. And you can't become an opera singer in this country without having the skills to do a new work and the curiosity. And that's what makes, that's why I have such hope for the future of opera, is there's a new curiosity and sense of adventure. And there are artists dying for a platform. Um, we do have the challenges of the arts have not been in schools, you know, generally for many decades now. So a lot of people are not growing up with it. We have got to get the arts back into schools. And I hope any young artist out there listening or who might hear the echo of this conversation will realize, you know, part of your responsibility as an artist, as a performer, as someone who loves this is to be an ambassador for it, to share it, to take it to a school, to bring people to other performances that you're not in. Make sure they show up to the ones that you're
And
in.
any teachers listening who have time
Yes,
to go the
teachers
other
as well. Yeah. So
way.
but you know, I have great hope for the future of it. I think we're in a very bumpy period where it's scary because the funding is so precarious. But we have to do our work. We have to roll up our sleeves and do our work. Um, but the art form has survived. There's always been storytelling with music, as long as there have been people. And opera, we do opera now very differently than people did it 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And 100, 200 years from now, it'll look totally different from what we see now. But the core of it is big emotional storytelling through great voices in some kind of a theatrical space. And there's so much you can do with all of that.
Oh my gosh, I wish that little clip could go out everywhere. That's really, really exciting. We just have a couple minutes left. So again,
Sure.
for all of you watching, please feel free to comment. I'm keeping my eye on that chat to make sure that we don't miss anything. But I'm curious, you have already talked about a couple moments in the show that are special for you.
Yeah.
The final scene, the duet on the bridge.
Mm.
Are there any other kind of Jake Heggie specials that just like moments that we can know that that's a moment that you're really proud of in 3 December?
Oh my gosh. I think Madeline's first aria when she's on the stage doing this Broadway show. Um, when um, when B opens her heart to Charlie, when B opens her heart to her mother, when Charlie opens his heart to his sister, when in the second part after his partner has died and he's singing this aria to him, to the spirit of him surrounded by boxes of his clothes that he's going to be giving away. These big emotional moments that emerge into big tunes. And then the joy, like you talked about the shoes duet. They need something funny. It's a way of them to have fun, making fun of their mom's addiction to shoes while they cut up and have a wonderful evening, and then boom, drama hits us back in the face. Um, I live for those moments where the emotion is building this way and this way, and all of a sudden something else happens that takes the characters by surprise and takes the audience by surprise. But everything, absolutely everything, every note, every gesture in service of telling the story and getting us deeper into those characters' hearts. I'm very, very proud of this piece. I look back at it now with such gratitude and affection because it did take a big chunk of my life to write it and to find it. It is personal, but it's personal for so many people, and it feels just right. It's just one of those pieces that I don't think I would change a note. You know, I look back at it now. It's a little moment in my life, and it represents that particular moment. There's nothing I would change or shift at this point. It just
That is
feels
wonderful to hear.
like
You,
it.
you oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But you brought up kind of the wit of the shoes duet, for example, and there are lots throughout this
There's a
opera.
lot of fun.
Little
Yeah.
little banter, lots of jokes. Um, I'm always fascinated. How do you think about comedy in opera? Like, how do you approach comedy when you're working on composing this and orchestrating it? Because obviously drama, kind of soaring melodies, while they're very difficult and come kind of once in a blue moon, but we all kind of understand how that gets our heartstrings.
Mhm.
How does comedy work? How do you approach that?
If you don't have the duo, you don't have the big drama. You need to have the lighter moments. Otherwise, you don't know what's lost or what's missing in the big drama. So that's why these lighter moments, and that's what we do as people. In dark times, we make jokes, right? And that's very, very human. And so even in Dead Man Walking, there are a couple of laugh out loud moments. There's fun and laughter in Moby-Dick, you know, um, and definitely, in this family drama, because they need it. And it's where our hearts always want to go. We want to go to joy. We want to go to laughter, but sometimes life events make it very, very difficult. Opera does drama very well. It's, if you look historically, how many actual comedies have stood the test of time? You can count them on a couple of hands,
Yeah.
They don't, it's the hardest thing in opera. Original story is very, very hard in opera, like really challenging. And comedy, because, as Rossini showed us, it's not only this, the story still has to be about high stakes, that something stands to be lost, something very important. But how we work our way out of it is with wit and with music that is genuinely funny. And he wrote funny music, and you would think that would be easy, but it's not. It's not easy to write funny music that isn't trite or stupid,
Or sounds like
that,
Rossini.
right, or sounds like Rossini. So so I think, but within big dramas, there are always lighter, joyful moments. That's why the big drama works, because of those very human moments. And I look for those moments. I live for them.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, looking at the season that we've had, here at Virginia Opera. And I think it speaks to kind of your assessment of the operatic art form, that this is actually the first quote unquote traditional opera that Virginia Opera is doing. Wagner at Topgolf in the Jonathan Dove orchestration, a fabulous kind of reimagining of La Boheme from the perspective of Rodolfo with no chorus and a very intimate staging. And this is really the first opera that is presented kind of wholesale as, as the composer intended. I think that's wonderful, and kind of
Yeah.
speaks to all of your hope of this changing art form as it goes. And of course, will be followed later this spring here at Virginia Opera by The Marriage of Figaro. Speaking of comedy,
Amazing.
kind of,
Comedy, but also big drama,
and lots of contrast.
Yes, lots of contrast and beautiful tunes. Oh,
And I
amazing.
like to think a lovely relationship between composer and librettist, if only we had those
Yeah.
letters. But we are quickly running out of time, but I want to thank you, Jake, so much for joining us this evening. This was a really wonderful discussion, and I know my listening experience at 3 Decembers has changed because of this. Please, if you are watching and you have any questions that we didn't address, please reach out to Virginia Opera. We'd be happy to do what we can to answer those questions for you. Tickets are still available for 3 Decembers in its various iterations across the state. If you scroll to the top of your comments, you'll find the link for those tickets starting at only $15. A phenomenal cast. Again, Karen Ziemba and others. Wonderful new production, wonderful conductor by our very own Adam Turner. We are in very good hands for this intimate, wonderful family drama. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great evening, and we will see you at the opera.